Welcome to On Time, On Target, hosted by former stealth fighter pilot Steve Ankerstar. Learn from Steve's combat experience and financial expertise as he helps people like you not only clarify your financial goals, but to invest with military precision to achieve them. Listen in for mission-focused financial planning and disciplined investment management strategies that will help you turn your dreams into reality. Now, it's time to strap in and prepare for takeoff as we kick in the afterburners for today's show.
This show has one mission: to make your dreams reality. I'm Steve Ankerstar, and I'm On Time, On Target. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for listening in. I'm Steve Ankerstar, and welcome to episode 1 of On Time, On Target. In this episode, I'm basically going to introduce myself so you have some background information on who is it you're listening to. If you are going to subscribe to this channel and listen to financial advice, you should at least know some of the background of the person that's going into this. So ultimately, I'm going to tell you a flying story during this time frame, but I'm going to start with a little bit about myself and what brought me into the financial business, and then I'll conclude it with a presentation that's kind of popular on my speaking circuit, where I talk about dropping the first bomb of shock and awe from an F-117 stealth fighter. So that's the story behind it. If you're looking for financial material, you can just go ahead and move on to episode 2, because this is really just an introduction. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm the founder of On Time, On Target LLC, which is the parent company of the On Time podcast. I cannot tell you how excited I am to finally have episode 1 up, running, and posted, so I can finally have the podcast that I literally have been thinking about for almost a decade now. The purpose of this podcast is going to be how you can stay on time, on target. So when you think of that, that's obviously a military term, but from a personal perspective, how you can do all the things you need to do on a daily basis to be able to get you to where you want to go. Or in other words, how to make your dreams reality. Part of that is breaking down all of the information that you have available to you and answering one question, and that is, what should I be doing today to make sure that I'm doing enough to where I can meet my goals in the long term? So that's the purpose of the podcast. So let me go ahead and get into telling you about myself. I am a certified financial planner. I do run also, I'm the founder of a wealth management firm and perform investment advisory services in that capacity, as well as do financial planning in that capacity. All of that is with my Series 65 license, as well as my CFP designation. With a CFP, you have to act as a fiduciary, which means I have to act in my client's best interest. For the purpose of this podcast, though, this is going to be financial education. So up front, I must tell you, my disclaimer is, even though I'm an advisor and wealth manager and financial planner, in the purpose of the podcast, I'm not acting in that capacity. The information you're going to receive in this podcast is financial education only, and you're going to have to do your own due diligence before taking action on the information that you receive. There's no possible way for me to obviously know your personal situation, so I'm going to throw out generic strategies that are out there that I do use either myself or with clients, or that are wildly popular strategies for you to use, but you have to unfortunately sort through and figure out for yourself or seek a professional advisor to help you with that. So let me start with telling you a little bit about who I am. I'm just over 50 years old, turned 50 last year. I live in Round Rock, Texas with my wife and 2 teenage daughters. I used to be in the Air Force for 20 years and then retired out of the Air Force in the 2013 timeframe. During my time in the Air Force, I was very fortunate to have been an Air Force fighter pilot. I flew the F-15C, which is the air superiority fighter, and I also flew the F-117A Nighthawk, more commonly known as the stealth fighter. I also did a tour in Air Education and Training Command where I commanded a T-38 squadron, teaching the next generation of fighter pilots to go out into the combat air forces. During my career, several amazing opportunities, far more blessed than I deserve. I was able to interview for the Thunderbirds, the Air Force Aerial Demonstration Squadron. I made it to the finals, got to fly with the team, and unfortunately did not make the team. However, it was a great experience, and I look back on that as one of my fondest memories of getting to fly with the team. What an opportunity. Also, just a few years after that, I was able to interview in the White House for the Air Force Aide to the President. So when you think of the Air Force Aide to the President, most people think of the person carrying the football, and that's true. It's actually not just one person, because that person would have to sleep. It's the 5 individuals that make up kind of the one person that does spend 24 hours a day, basically either with the president or right next door to the president. And yes, there is a briefcase involved, and there are several security requirements involved with that, which I, of course, won't go into. But basically shadowing the president for a 2-year stint. Interviewed that, got to go to the White House, talk to the current folks that were performing that function, asked them all about it. They got to ask me several questions, got to go through some advanced security clearances screening that I had not, even though I was flying in combat for the Air Force at the time, even higher levels of clearance I didn't know existed. So it was really a great opportunity. Ultimately, didn't get that job either, but value that opportunity to go and sit there in the East Wing of the White House and the First Lady's waiting area and talk to some pretty amazing folks. I retired from my last tour in the Air Force was over at Al-Udeid, working in the Air Operations Center over there as the Deputy Chief of Combat Ops. What a great opportunity. And I took that time. I had a year where I was deployed without my family, and I took that time to really focus on what I wanted to do next in my career. I knew I was going to retire. I knew I wanted to open my own business, and I knew I loved financial planning and investment management. So I used the opportunity I had to complete some self-study programs, some online programs, get my certifications, and prepare myself so once that I retired in 2013, I was able to step out the door and open my own financial services firm. So absolutely a perfect way to prepare for something like that, so I could step out the door and hit the ground running. So I started a company called Afterburner Financial based here in Round Rock, Texas, to where I serve individual clients and their families with both investment management and financial planning. Secondly, during that time, when I was starting that business, I also knew I wanted to take to the airwaves and start a podcast. I love to speak. I've done some speaking, some professional speaking where people hire me to come out and talk, and I would love to come talk to your team, and I can speak on about anything. I generally talk about teamwork, talk about what it's like to fly in combat, talk about resiliency if your organization is going through some struggles, or like the country's going through some struggles right now. Those are things I can talk to folks about, kind of sharing my experiences and sharing my techniques that I learned from my military background and how to cope and deal with those sort of situations. So see the ototnow.com website if you're interested in me speaking for your organization. Part of that speaking is I knew I wanted to host a podcast. So I started into developing that idea, and lo and behold, 7 years later, I am here finally publishing that first episode. So a lot of other things had to happen. Obviously, I had a young family at the time that they have needs and concerns, and things I love being about is being a good dad. So going to volleyball matches and things. And then I also did my first 2 years of PhD study. I still have yet to do my dissertation. So that's forthcoming. But there was a lot of things I had to do during that time while I stood up my business. So I put the podcast aside, said I will get back to that. And fortunately, today marks that day. As far as academic credentials that I have, 3 master's degrees. I have 2 years of a PhD, everything but the dissertation. So lots of schooling. I say I have lots of degrees, 2 children, a couple of companies, and 1 wife. And I like the ratios out of all of that. As far as my aviation criteria, I've spent 20 years as an Air Force fighter pilot, all the way up through the instructor evaluator level, 2,600 and change hours. And I also have my airline transport pilot license. So I could step away from the Air Force and gone right to the airlines like a lot of my friends did, but instead chose to go into the business for myself. And that's what brings me to today. My military experience, I talked briefly about it. The first thing I'll talk about is flying the F-15C Eagle. If you can picture the F-15, gray aircraft, twin tails, it's nice and big. It's a single-seat fighter. Got to go out and perform the job of air superiority. So when you think of the greatest jobs in the world, one of them is providing air superiority in the F-15. Arguably the best fighter ever made. You could say now that, yes, there are more technologically advanced fighters out there, I'll give you that. And you could say that the P-51 is arguably, P-51 Mustang, that is arguably the best out there. But hey, the Eagle was the one that I wanted to fly at pilot training. I did well enough to be able to get myself into that particular cockpit and was able to fly that a number of years while I was on active duty. The second airplane I flew in combat was the F-117 Nighthawk, and that's the story I'm going to tell you today. It's the black airplane shaped like a triangle. It was basically a secret for a number of years, and then it was released. And I had the opportunity to fly that for 2.5 years and got to do some really special things. But anybody who served in the military will tell you that the largest privilege out there is to be able to command. And fortunately, I was able to take command of a flying training squadron where I had some brilliant instructors with me and about 100 students a year that we put through the course. And basically, if you think of pilot training from a year-long stint, I had them for the second half. So folks would start pilot training, and those that wanted to and were good enough to get into the advanced, fighter bomber track, if you will, would come over to our squadron. Our team would take them and continue to develop their skills with some advanced formation work and advanced aerobatic work and actually maneuvering in relation to another airplane type of work to actually get the student to see if that's what they wanted to spend the rest of their career doing. So part of it's aptitude, part of it's desire, but our team would basically take the students we got, make them as good as we could, and send them off to the combat air forces ready to go. So that's what I was able to do for a couple of years there in Columbus, Mississippi. To transition out of the telling you my background and starting the story, again, you can see a couple of the story I'm about to tell you was highlighted in a few books out there, one of which was called Cobra 2, the inside story of the invasion and occupation of Iraq. It's Michael Gordon, General Bernard Traynor. Once I got back from the shock and awe campaign, which again, this is March 2003, I was immediately interviewed along with several of us who flew either the first night like I did, or I actually flew the first 3 nights. But basically the initial cadre that went in to start the shock and awe campaign, as well as Operation Iraqi Freedom, sat down with reporters and they asked us a bunch of questions, and we divulged, of course, what we could. A lot of that stuff was classified, and that's what you're going to get today. You're going to get an unclassified version, obviously, of the events of that week, basically leading up to shock and awe. So let's start though with we'll start our story with thinking of where you were on September 11th, 2001. Everybody knows exactly where they were if you were above probably the age of 8 when we saw on TV, God bless you if you saw it in person, but most of us saw it on TV, an airplane run into a building. And particularly, it was a Tuesday morning. I was at Holloman Air Force Base, which used to fly the F-117 stealth fighter. It was the only place that flew it operationally while it was active. And I had chemical warfare training that morning. So when you think of chemical warfare training, think of gas masks and all the extra layers of stuff that you would have to wear if we either got a nuclear attack or a bio attack, all of that gear. And you had to go through that training, I don't know, every year, 6 months, 18 months, I don't remember. But it seemed like you always had to go through it because nobody looked forward to it. So you have to carry your bag with you of all of your gear, which of course has been issued to you. So you drag that out from your hit and run area in your garage or wherever you had it ready to go, because most fighter pilots are ready to go at a moment's notice in case you're called. And of course, September 10th, 2001, nobody was thinking that it was going to actually happen anytime soon, but everything changed the morning of the 11th. So I had my bag with me, and unfortunately, I was a captain at the time, and that means I should have been at this training 10 to 15 minutes early and be a good role model for the troops. I was not early and not a good role model for the troops that day. I walked into the classroom about 1 minute prior. And since I had, in military terms, if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late. So I fell into that category. So as I walked into the room, of course, what you would see in a normal situation like that is that, of course, the only open chair is way up front. So, okay, that's the penalty I have to pay for being late. So I marched right up to the front as I'm walking up there, I just kind of looked to see if I knew anybody in the room. I recognized some of the troops, but I didn't see any other pilots and no other officers that I knew that were in the room. And I plopped down, and as I'm walking up there, I saw the big TV screen. There's, I don't know, it's probably a 100-inch screen or so, projection screen at the time. And when I looked up on the screen, there was a movie playing, and I didn't recognize the movie. A lot of times you would show up at these training events and they would just play a movie because everybody's supposed to get there early, like good soldiers and good airmen. So, you get there early and at least you would get to watch, Die Hard or just some cool movie, Executive Decision. And I know you're probably laughing at my choice of what I would just said were cool movies. But anyway, not the point of today. But I was watching this movie and an airplane just ran into a building. And I hadn't seen this movie. So as I kind of sat down, I happened to notice you could kind of hear a pin drop in there. And I somewhere about the time I sat down, I looked up and realized that this was actually live. It wasn't a fake CNN shot from the movies that they do a pretty good job with. It's like, this is live. It's like, oh crap. And so just like you, I was wondering, was it an accident? Did a pilot get lost? Did he not see the big building, albeit two of them sitting there? That's the initial reaction was like, what? How did this happen? And then I don't remember the exact number of time between the two, but obviously our class was put on pause because that had just happened and everybody wanted to sit and stay engaged into what exactly was going on. Of course, if you remember the building did not fall. The tower didn't fall right away. It stood there and took it like a champ for some time. So it was bad, but not nearly as bad as later on when, of course, the second airplane comes in and hits the second tower. And then somewhere after that, I believe one of the towers fell and then both fell. And then we realized that was no accident, obviously. Something happening once can be an accident. Obviously, two airplanes, two buildings, nope, no accident. And then what's going on? So I do remember a young gentleman, I don't remember his name, but I do remember him pulling out you have part of your MOP gear is a combat helmet, and putting that on. I'm like, you're okay, you don't need to do that, it's going to be okay. We are not under attack here. But I walked to the back of the room and I called operations, so it's called ops in the flying world, called over to ops, which is on the other side of base, and of course the phone's ringing off the hook, and the boss said, go home. So when you think of that, and it's strange for those that haven't served in the military, but those that have, when your boss says go home, that means go home and get ready. So you go home, you get your affairs in order, which is a nice way of saying make sure you have your will in place. If you can prepay your bills, I was single at the time, living by myself. So it's and if you're in a place to do so, mail off, a couple months worth of rent, prepay the electric company, that sort of thing is really kind of tidy up that if I left tonight, probably not going to happen. But if I did, do I have all my gear that I'm supposed to have? Do I have the toiletries, medicines? If you're taking any medicines, pilots generally don't take very many because we can't. But those sorts of things. And if you're going to say goodbye to anybody, you might want to go ahead and knock that off the list, because we're not doing any more training stateside. We're going to wait for a deployment order. So, and we would sit home. So what does that really amount to as a warfighter? You go home, you make sure you have all that stuff. And most of us had that pretty well ready. But at least find it, if it's tucked away in the garage somewhere, you kind of might have to move a few things to get to it. But basically you bring out your gear, you throw it in the trunk of your car and you say, okay, I'm ready. And make sure financials are squared and make sure you talk to somebody. Some people do power of attorneys to folks or a limited power of attorney while you're gone. Basically the standard stuff. And then you start watching TV again, and basically whose butt needed to be kicked for this, right? This was clearly an act of war. I wouldn't say clearly. As a warfighter, you tend to look through the lens of this is an act of war. And we need to go kick somebody's butt, and we need to do it tonight, and we need to avenge the losses, which we had no idea at the time of what those were going to be. But who did it, and where exactly am I going to be flying in the next couple of days? That is kind of how you think it's going down as a warfighter, especially when you're flying an airplane like the F-117 stealth fighter, which is particularly designed to kick the door down in a war. So if you think back to Desert Storm, the F-117s went in first. You probably saw the footage on CNN. When I say CNN, I'm meaning all of the networks, depending on what you like to watch, but basically see it on the news. And that's what we had trained for. And we had basically practiced ever since I'd gone out to Holloman. We brought out some war plans and said, if we have to go here, here's what we're going to do. If we have to go here. So you kind of had an idea once we figured out where we were going, we were going to be in action here pretty quick. But the issue that I would say was the bigger issue is who's to blame. So as our national security team, the administration, and I say we, I mean the countries at the highest level, trying to figure out who did this. And it wasn't obvious. And if you've dealt with terrorist organizations, and I was in a briefing in 1998, so that's 3 years prior, where I was briefed on bin Laden and what he was up to, and kind of the backstory of how he got exiled from Saudi Arabia, kind of fell out of favor. He's the number one terrorist on the list, but nobody kind of thinks he's up to anything. I don't remember the brief clearly because I was probably more focused on flying my sortie that day, but I do remember hearing the name. And it's like, okay, bad guys out there, as a young captain, somebody's going to tell you, when it's your time to go take them out, kind of thing. So you don't really have to worry about the high level stuff, but I didn't know he existed. But if you learn more about terrorist organizations, one thing that is for sure is if something happens in the world, they all take credit, which makes it very difficult to figure out who's who when everybody says it was them. And if you're not a national security specialist, I do have a couple of masters in national security, but they want the credibility. So everybody claims they did it. And it's like, well, that's not helpful. So we went to, as a national security team, obviously we're going to avenge this loss. We're going to go take out whoever did it and take a look at some other things along the way to make the world a better place for this having had happened. Right. So try to, that's what we were trying to do. And again, I'm speaking for the country, but you can read the books on it. In big picture, that's what we were trying to do. Well, if you remember, forces went into Afghanistan. And when I say forces, I mean special forces. We didn't actually put if you think mainline troops on the ground, we're talking special forces, and we flew bombing missions over Afghanistan. And I say we, I mean the Air Force, the U.S. did. The F-117 didn't go, but the B-2 stealth bombers, which if you think is the big flying wing, Mama stealth, if you will, quite a bit bigger than the F-117 and carries a lot more armament, was flying missions basically over Afghanistan. Special forces were working with Afghan troops on the ground and kind of started an anti-terrorism campaign. Not the topic of today, but it is important to realize how that went on first. And then, if you remember, if you take a look at the dates from September of 2001 to March of 2003, that's a significant amount of time. So while we were in Afghanistan as a country, kind of trying to take care of things, the predominant theme I kept hearing as a warfighter was about Iraq. And you would hear the axis of evil, and we would talk about Iraq, and that they had weapons of mass destruction that were going to, Saddam Hussein was either using them or going to use them against his own people. And it's like, okay. And so following along that storyline, didn't, personally speaking as a warfighter perspective, and again, even though you have to follow orders from those above you and you go off and participate in whatever whatever you're told to do, you don't have any choice. You just go do it, whether you believe in it or not. As I'm following storylines, I even kind of chuckled thinking, boy, we're kind of focused on this Iraq thing when that really, I don't think Iraq did 9/11. So it was a weird to watch the country kind of go down a slippery slope of 9/11 happens. Who did it? We went to Afghanistan. Well, we can't find the guy that we think did it. So we're going to take out Saddam Hussein. He's got nukes and we're going to go take him out of power. And that happened. And I remember clearly, I'm skipping over, several days and weeks of this back and forth and coalitions of the willing and speeches. But I do remember Colin Powell's speech at the UN where he said, this is a slam dunk case. And at the time, I remember Colin Powell was a cult hero in the military. I don't care what branch you're in. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he was the ultimate voice of reason, seemed like the smartest guy in the room, no matter what room he was in. And here's Colin Powell telling everyone this is a slam dunk case. And I just remember being a captain going, whoa, all right, well, I guess it is. I guess Saddam's got WMD. And we started to hear rumors somewhere in there that the F-117, that U.S. was going to take action against Saddam Hussein, which clearly, since we have flown over Iraq before, meant the F-117 was going in. So somewhere along those lines, and it's too bad I can't remember clearly, but I do remember that we're having a squadron function at the DO's house. DO means Director of Operations, so number 2 in the squadron. And everybody's there. Almost everybody's married. I'm dating my now wife at the time, and we're there at the party. And I remember the DO and the commander disappear, and it's like, oh, okay. Then we come back, and the DO, I believe, is the one, at least I heard it from, was, hey, let's gather around. We've got a deployment order. And that meant, and I want to say that was somewhere in January, we did have, a few weeks, maybe 4 to 6 weeks to kind of really prep. But it's hey, we just got put on notice that we are going to go deploy. And likely, you never know until you actually land, no kidding, where you're going to go. But we ended up deploying to Qatar, which, a lot of people it's QATAR. A lot of people say Qatar. It's not, it's Qatar. So you're going to hear Qatar throughout this brief. But yeah, it's off to Qatar we go with a squadron of F-117s. So when you think of what does that mean? Well, it wasn't just F-117s. There were several other squadrons of airplanes and support troops. And I'm sure there was, intelligence teams and legal teams, and everybody starts deploying. Well, if you haven't deployed before, a little perspective into military life, I happened to pin on Major just prior to this deployment, literally like 2 days prior to taking off in an airplane for flying across the ocean. And, flying across the ocean is its own thing. We turn through Europe, which means you fly 11 hours into Europe, spend the night for a couple of days, and you fly on into the Middle East to your end place for you to stay. But when you get there, everybody's sleeping in tents. So if you've heard of Tent City in the Middle East, yeah. So there you are, kind of at the, if you will, the pinnacle of or the meat of your career, the fun years, if you will, as a major, which is from the officer ranks, is kind of the the last chance to be one of the top experts in your field before you pin on your next rank. Then you kind of get into command chain, and then you have to have more responsibility and start leading people. Major is kind of that perfect, you get to be right in the heart of the fun part of your career. And yeah, we had to get over there, and we had tents, and I can't remember if it was 6 or 8 of us, pilots to a tent, and when we had it good, I'll give you that. If somebody's laughing already, like listen to a pilot complain, I'm not complaining. I had air conditioning in my tent, but it was a tent, and that's where we slept. And we started flying training missions. So when you think of, everybody can't show up the day prior. So when you think of a flow of forces, and you can read about this is not secret, you can read about it in plenty of books. It takes months for forces to flow into theater, meaning into the Middle East in this case. So you get there, and if you're one of the early ones, then you have some time on your hands. So we started flying training missions, which some of those were normal training missions, just like we would have flown over New Mexico, which some places of Qatar look like some places of New Mexico, and the fact that there's not a lot there. And we also started flying missions up and down the Persian Gulf. I had happened to have flown, most of our squadron. To be an F-117 stealth guy, you had to be an experienced fighter pilot. So almost everybody in the squadron, if I remember right, it was everybody but one, had combat time. So we'd all flown up and down the Persian Gulf, but still, why not check out the new procedures? So we would basically fly up and down the Persian Gulf and go up to Kuwait. Remember where Kuwait is there, just south of Iraq, if you will, at the top of the Persian Gulf, and kind of turn around and come back home. And we were going to do that basically every day. And then there was going to be a time when we were going to get a go order where you didn't turn around, you just went on in and did whatever it is the nation needed you to do. So that's what we were doing during this time. And so picture, I think it was February 2nd, we went over there, and the story that I'm going to start picking up with is March 17th. So about a month and a half, if you will, of getting acclimated to the desert, getting into a battle rhythm for being on the other side of the world, and then getting ready to go, figuring that the call is coming. Generally, when you flow that many forces into theater, unless there's an outright surrender, which I can't remember last time we saw that, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. So if you think Monday, March 17th, the St. Patrick's Day, and President Bush gave a speech, and in this speech, he was talking about the axis of evil, and then specifically Iraq, and then specifically warning Saddam Hussein, and specifically saying to Saddam Hussein, you have 48 hours to get out of your country, otherwise we're coming in. So it's like, all of us watching this together, not all of us, I mean, some were out training, but I do remember I was actually watching the TV live when it happened, and you look around, and in your ops building, which again you made with 2x4s and plywood, and threw the computers in, and it works pretty well, but it was still pretty homemade, if you will. And you kind of look around, and it's like, well, this is going to happen. So that was Monday. And if you follow along the books that are out there, there are certain people that track, individuals' locations, and they have several technological programs to be able to do that, to figure out where someone is that we're trying to track. But you also know that it's kind of hard, because it did take us a while to get Saddam Hussein, and it took us kind of forever in the big picture to get bin Laden. So while we have all these things and all these people paid to do it, you don't always know where somebody is. Well, on Tuesday, it came down through the chain, and that's me skipping through a bunch of classified stuff, but it just came down that we know where he is. And since we knew that the F-117 was going to go in, I was able to spend, several others of kind of the leadership team of the deployed squadron, we're kind of in the know, because we needed to get airplanes and pilots ready. And, I was one of the team of many doing that. But it's hey, we need to get ready to go. What's the latest? And then we would react based off of the latest information. Well, we got the word on Tuesday. It's like, we know exactly where he is. So how about now? And they're like, okay, it's kind of like if you picture a wing ops center where the person in charge is like, okay, are you ready to go? Are you ready to go? It's like, we're in the green, sir. We're in the green. It's like, we can make it happen. And, all the way around the room, and then it went back up to the president, and, poor form, right, to go in and take somebody out that you told them you have 48 hours to get out of your country, and then you take them out at the 36-hour point. So kind of everybody spun back down and said, yeah, that president guy, he's kind of right. He did say 48 hours, so we should probably at least wait for the deadline. So, but it was a fun exercise, at least. Got everybody spun up and excited, and then spun right back down, and then spun up all again next day. So trying to sleep during this time, during exciting times, you kind of, for those in the military, pretty much your whole career is work yourself to exhaustion and then pass out and then get up and do it again. But it was tough to sleep, because obviously you knew that this was going to happen. So you would go back and do your best to get a little bit of sleep and then come back out. So Wednesday, now the 48 hours had expired, and you can read, I won't go into too much detail, because you can read several books that are out there about the strike on Dora Farms. It's called the Decapitation Strike, where 2 F-117s launched out of Qatar, went north through a whole series of events, dropped their bombs on target. Great job for both gentlemen that went on that mission. Came back, landed. We all celebrated. It was daylight the next day by the time they landed. And, we'd heard Secretary Rumsfeld from the beginning say, if we do a decapitation strike, he was so smart, or so he thought, and he is very smart, but some of his philosophies are a touch academic and not based in the real world. And this is one of them. And he did say that, if you cut the head off the snake will die. So that was as easy as that was going to be. So we're just going to go up there, put a couple F-117s on it, and they don't miss, which for the most part is true. And we came back and we lauded our folks as heroes. And we thought, gosh, this may be over. How interesting would that be? Well, much like reality is he wasn't there. And so therefore it's technically a miss. I mean, the bombs hit where they were supposed to, but in the big picture, it was a miss for the U.S. Saddam Hussein lives on, but it had got real at that point because at least a couple of bombs had blown up inside the country of Iraq. So we spin down from that. Thursday, if you can read more about this, but in general, the other services, because it'd kind of been an Air Force thing for that decapitation strike, well, everybody's ready to go. And if you roll back 20 years to Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and still today, and probably the next time if we have a major war that involves ground troops, there is some posturing amongst the services on who's going in first and sequencing and who gets to be the hero and all of that. Well, the next day, all we were hearing was the ground folks are ready to go. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. And it's just like, well, we're not ready to go. We just landed. So we need to recoup a little bit. And it's like, are we really going today? And it came down from above again through the command chain that it was going to happen on Friday. And that was going to be the shock and awe campaign that Secretary Rumsfeld had really had in his hip pocket. And we all knew it was coming because we had trained for it. So, you know who your leaders are. And when you start trying to get inside their minds of what they're saying, we had gone out and we had gone to Nevada. There's a big training range out there and flown some mission with other folks that we figured we would be in country with and kind of practice before you go step onto the court for the real deal. All that is very, very normal operations. So we knew the shock and awe campaign was going to happen. And the shock and awe campaign was going to be around, the theory, again, academic, not necessarily based in reality. But in Secretary Rumsfeld's world, if you were going to put enough firepower in here to be able to bomb anybody around the clock for a couple of days, then they would clearly submit because they wouldn't be able to sleep. And then they would simply lay down their arms. They would give up their dear leader, and we could drive tanks into downtown Baghdad, and all of us would be met with chocolate and flowers, and because they'd be so appreciative of the fact that we liberated them from their terrible leader. Okay, that's a pretty academic paper. I hope he got an A on that one, because that's not how it works in the real world, and everybody knows that. People, I've never been bombed, but I can certainly, since I've been on the bomber end of it, nobody's appreciating that. And if they're supposed to meet us with chocolates and flowers, maybe we shouldn't bomb them first. But that was the plan. So we said, okay, we're going to unleash the fury of shock and awe on Friday morning, and that is what we did. So you think Friday morning, March 21st, 2003, and the first ones in were going to be the stealth fighter. So let me tell you a little bit about the stealth fighter, since we didn't get into it earlier. But the stealth fighter, again, triangle type design. It was designed by engineers to be stealthy first and then fly second. So in other words, the aeronautical engineers had it before, the stealth engineers had it before the aeronautical engineers, which is why it looks different than any other airplane that's out there. It was built to be stealthy first. There's some angles on there. When I talk to kids, I like to say, imagine that if I held the stealth fighter up, the top of it, you could see that if it was a mirrored surface and you shined a flashlight at it, none of the flashlight would return back to you. So that was that was how it dispersed radar, if you will. That's at a very basic level. There might be a little more than that. And then it had some stuff, on some radar absorbent material that was around the airplane, a coating, if you will, that also helped. So that's all I'll say about that, but it was very stealthy, actually. It could really sneak in and sneak out and get the job done. And it was designed for nighttime precision attack, kicking the door down, if you will, and laser guided bombs. So in the cockpit, on my stick and throttle, I had the means to be able to put a laser spot on exactly what I wanted to, meaning a window, a doorway, a cave entrance, or whatever it was I was being called to do. Middle of a street intersection, we'll get back to that. basically I could put this bomb wherever I wanted as long as there were no clouds involved. And I would drop the bomb out of the airplane, the doors would open, the bomb would go. I would put the laser spot on the target. Even somebody else could put a laser spot on the target. So bomb don't care. It just sees the laser and it goes towards the spot. It's that simple. Well, we had used the F-117 in Bosnia in '99 for Allied force, and we actually lost an F-117, meaning it got shot down, which is a big deal for those of us about to launch out again a couple of years later. Hey, I thought you said I was stealthy. Well, one did get shot down. And for those of us for any of us that have flown in Europe, there's always weather. Well, since there were some issues with weather in Europe, they had gone back to the drawing board. The U.S., and designed a bomb that basically would be like the JDAM, the Joint Direct Attack Munition, where that would leave the airplane and would go to coordinates. So it would fly itself with a GPS to a coordinate. And then what it would do, what we had in test version for us that first night was we had enhanced bombs that basically it would leave the airplane and go to coordinates, and we would shine the laser, and if it would see the laser, it would basically go, okay, I guess you want me to go there. So we were basically able to update the GPS coordinates using our laser, which would update where the bomb's going, so the bomb would hit the target. If we could see it, we would put the laser on it. If we never saw the target, then the bomb would just go to the coordinates, which is going to be close. So if I can use the laser, I can hit the vent. No doubt, every day, don't care, easy, 100 times a day. However, if it's going to GPS coordinates, you may not actually hit the vent. You're going to hit within, feet of the event, if you will, of the vent, if you will. So you may not have the exact desired effect without that precision, but still precision nonetheless. So we carried all those on the night one there team. When you think of the history of the F-117, it stayed in the black world for a long time. Its first use, when it came out of the black world, actually was, the cover story, and you can read all about this, was, folks that were flying the F-117 had been selected for the A7 program, which flew out of Las Vegas, Nevada, and they would go in and basically take off out of an unmarked airplane from Nellis Air Force Base, go somewhere for the week, and then come back on Friday and fly their A7s. Well, and what was really going on is the A7 was actually the F-117 before it had been acknowledged. And there was a day when one of them crashed, and then of course the Air Force, when you have contingencies for these things, so they would keep a truck, and I'm simplifying this and shortening a very long story, but basically if an F-117 crashed, the Air Force had two trucks ready, a theoretical two trucks, one empty and one filled with A7 parts. So they would drive to the crash site and basically pick up all the F-117 parts and put them in one truck, spread out the A7 parts, and then light them on fire, and then leave and call CNN. So that was kind of the drill, except for when the third one actually, and before it was released from the black world, crashed. They showed up to do that like they had done before, and there was already a news crew on the site, so they kind of faded back into the woods or into the desert of Nevada and called back and said, well, what now? And it's like, well, I guess we will be acknowledging this today since it's on TV. So that was late. I want to say it was December '88. There's some great books out there that detail that if you're interested in more information, and probably slightly more accurate information, because I'm covering a lot of material there. But the first operational use was in Panama. If you remember that raid to go down there and snag Noriega. And then it was used again in Desert Storm, which was where most people really kind of found out about the F-117, unless you were a Popular Mechanics magazine fan, because they kept trying to guess what the secret airplane was and called it the F-19. And I remember there were F-19 models out and about that you could get from, was it Revell, was the big company. So so there's a lot of stories behind the airplane, but actually most people knew from Desert Storm. When they kind of highlighted the airplane, they showed a lot of the night footage, if you will, of the green screens and the crosshairs and the bombs going right into vents and indoors and things like that. It was also used in Allied force, like we already talked about, where we did lose an airplane, and then of course it was used again in Iraqi freedom. And to kind of clean up the history, it was inactivated in 2008. Inactivated is an interesting term. What I had heard was it wasn't retired as most airplanes are because they wanted to maintain the capability. It just got a little too expensive to fly, which it was pretty expensive airplane to fly. I'd heard when I was flying, it was the most expensive per flight hour in the inventory. So, and it only carries 2 bombs, which you have to go a long way to just drop 2 bombs. So I see the point. So went inactive, and there are rumors that it's back flying. There have been articles and pictures taken that say it's back flying, but you can look up that stuff on your own. So let's talk next about the shock and awe. So back to Qatar and back to the Middle East and back to March 21st, 2003, and going out the door on the shock and awe campaign. The particular package, and you package air power together just like you would package an orchestra together. You things are sequenced and they're very carefully put together with certain capabilities and things. And you've talked to all these people that are at least the leads of all these teams, and you go out the door and you execute the most advanced football play, if you will, that ever, right? Because airplanes are everywhere. They're separated by altitudes. They're separated by times. There's free fire zones. There are no fire zones. There are no fly zones. There's all kinds of things to think about, not just from airplane deconfliction, meaning it's making sure airplanes don't hit each other, but there's weapons deconfliction, meaning that weapons flying through the air don't hit any airplanes. And then there's free fire restrictions. So if you point at a friendly base, all of the bases that are out there that are U.S. bases or coalition have systems like Patriots that are meant to shoot down anything that's pointing right at it, which can be an interesting thing if you're supposed to go back there and land, right? So there's all kinds of methods out there to make sure we know who's who, and so we don't shoot our own people down. It still happens, and it did happen, not on the night of shock and awe, but it happened on night 3, if my memory serves me correct. Might have been night 2. But so it's this master plan, and we have literally rehearsed it, and we're ready for it, and we're going to go out and execute it. So the package commander was the squadron commander of the F-117s. He was, I say Ram 1 is the call sign because that's what he always flew under. So he was going to be Ram 1. There were going to be 9 of us that was going to step out the door. I was his number 2 as his deputy package commander. So if for some reason he fell out, then I would be able to lead the package off into combat. But if he didn't fall out, I would simply be there and be able to back him up along the way. What's a little bit different about the F-117 is at some point you stealth up, which means you pull your antennas in and you stop talking on the radio. So it's kind of the like calling a football play in silence. So after the ball snap, then it's like, okay, you don't know what's going on. You go do your thing, and then you don't really get to know what happened until you check back in a little, like an hour later, once you're back in the safe zone. So it's a little bit different. But when you think of the opening strike, we were going to go out there, and Ram was the call sign. And that's not the call sign we ended up using. And you know that pilots have call signs. My call sign's Cruiser. So when we're off someplace, people aren't throwing around my real name, Steve Ankerstar. They're throwing around Cruiser. So if there are spies and things like that that hear my name, they would hear my call sign. And literally in an operational flying squadron, you never use somebody's real name. And often you don't even know what their first name is unless they work for you, or it's your boss where you happen to put it on a piece of paper or something. We would joke about having first name Fridays sometimes just so we could remember what each other's first names were. But name tags, everything, it always said your call sign. And that's how we were known. Well, when you go to fly airplanes, just like Delta Flight 1400 is DAL 1400, or there's particular call signs there. Same thing with flying formations of airplanes. Well, we had always been Ram. We were the Black Sheep Squadron, 8th Fighter Squadron, and Ram was our call sign, and we were going to go forth into combat and use this call sign. Well, due to what I would say maybe some kindergarten level competition between our boss and a friend of his at the Air Ops Center. The Air Ops Center is the one who assigns these call signs. The unit doesn't have any, we didn't have any choice in it. We just said, we're Ram. It's like, no, you're not going to go with Ram because everybody knows that's the F-117. So we're going to assign you another one, so which everybody says, oh, okay. And then some individual personalities got involved and somebody thought it was funny. And no kidding, we went out the door on night one of Shock and Awe as a 9-ship of F-117s with the call sign of Bimbo 41 through 49. Yes, I did say the word Bimbo. That happened. And there was nothing we could do. And I'm sure somebody thought that was terribly funny, but it happened. So enough on that. We did not have to carry that through the next, I don't remember night 2, but I remember night 3 was Ice Age. So our call signs got better over time. But somebody got their jab in on night 1 for us. But to talk about how this was all structured out for Shock and Awe, and again, this is all widely available that I'm about to tell you, but at 9 o'clock local Baghdad time, a bunch of Tomahawks were going to go in, about 400. The total Tomahawks that went in, Tomahawk missile is, can come off of different systems, but largely Navy missiles coming in that would go in and stir things up. And these are missiles, obviously, so there's no people involved. So 400 of them were going to go into Baghdad at around 9 o'clock and strike things all around the city. And then 20 minutes later, there were 9 F-117s that were going to go across the target area. And when you picture Baghdad, picture it as you're looking at the map. It's kind of middle-ish of Iraq, but picture 4 airplanes coming in left to right and 4 airplanes coming in right to left. I call that, if you can picture, cat whiskers. And then you have 1 airplane that was going, starting from the north and went north to south right through the middle of that. Well, that 1 airplane that had to go all the way north had to strike a comm center that was still standing after, so basically all of southern Iraq had been cleared out from the no-fly zones, and most of northern Iraq had been kind of, all the military type stuff had been removed over years of no-fly zones. So there was 1 comm center though that was important that had to be taken out first. And the time over target downtown Baghdad was 20 minutes after the Tomahawks, so 9:20 local time over there, which is about 10 in the morning. Let's see, that would have been Mountain time. It was a morning over here, if you remember that morning, and the Fox and CNN coverage of that morning Shock and Awe was everywhere. And so Tomahawks were going in, and then the F-117s, the first jet through had to drop a comm center at 21:16:38, so 9:16:38 local, and then another F-117, instead of just continuing through the cat whiskers out the other side and going southbound, was going to peel off and go north. Well, the original plan is the squadron commander was going to take that first comm center up north and then come down and meet everybody over Baghdad, and then I was going to take the mission to where I peeled off and went north to basically, this building was big enough to where the first jet through was going to strike it once, and the second jet through was going to strike it again. And between the 2 of us, it was going to level the building. It worked. But due to the high threat mission for that first sortie and the fact that it was the squadron commander that was going on that sortie, I don't know what powers that be made the decision, but the boss and I switched sorties. So I ended up taking the sortie that went up north and ended up with that dropping the first bomb of Shock and Awe from a manned airplane at that 9:16:38 on that comm center. And then I went down through downtown Baghdad, met up with my buddies, more on that later, to drop my second bomb downtown Baghdad, and then came back home. After the F-117s went through, a few minutes later, and generally you space these things out, because when you can think of, you drop bombs on bad guys, they're going to get into their guns and they're going to start shooting in the air. At some point they stop, and obviously we've measured that for years. So we spread these things out, so the lead is back now out of the air by the time you send the next crew through. So some B-2s went afterwards, about 8 minutes later, and then some other, about 10 minutes after the F-117s, some other fighters, Hornets, Strike Eagles started kind of tossing, if you will, to where they weren't overflying Baghdad, but they were doing some long range stuff to where they could kind of go up to the edge of Baghdad, toss their munitions in there, and the munitions can still, hit the intended targets without putting the aircrew and airplanes in danger, because there were still a lot of things shooting at us that night. I have heard it was the largest single display of air power in U.S. history, and that the total tonnage was more than, obviously, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So you can verify that on your own. The launch, there were 9 of us that went out, so you can see, or you can picture in your mind that we launched from a an op center that was largely you get to Qatar, and that you have somebody that meets you there, and your folks say, hey, let me show you to where you guys are gonna work, where your op center is. And it's like, okay, well, you get to this, there's like a little paved road or a path, and then you look out and there's a stack of like a pallet of plywood and some materials sitting there, and they're like, here's your ops. And you're like, what? Right? Where's the building? And well, no, you were going to build a building. So the crew immediately had to go to work with building the building. So you can imagine a very, and it worked great, and built this place up. So very much a team effort to get everything up and running. And then that's where we launched out of from. So you can picture 9 folks lined up, getting their brief and all the emotions that are going through. And remember that last time the F-117 had gone to war, we lost one. So it wasn't, you were no longer the invisible man, because we had lost one. So it was kind of like you're almost invisible, right? So we wondered if technology had now outpaced our technology, or using another analogy, is the mousetrap better than the mouse now? Us being the mouse in that case, trying to sneak in and sneak out without getting shot. So, a little consternation going out the door to launch out on the mission. But launch out on the mission we did, and go from there. So the actual mission itself, 3 of us, 9 of us launched. It turned out only 3 of us made it across the target. There were some issues in the air refueling tracks that led to that. Part of the confusion fog of war is sometimes that happened. But 3 of us made it out. So the boss and I and one other person, basically Bimbo 41 through 43, made it out, made it across our targets. And when you can think of how we went to our mission, if you picture Qatar, it's like a thumb sticking out into the Persian Gulf. And it's about an hour south. So what's an hour in a fighter jet? It's about 500 miles, give or take. And so you have this thumb sticking out in the Persian Gulf. You launch out over the Persian, as soon as you're airborne, you kind of get feet wet, if you will, which means fly out over the water. And there's a big highway in the sky that's obviously not marked with signs and things, but there's procedures to where you're supposed to stay here and stay there and not be here. And here's your off ramps. And you go through a series of procedures. You basically go up to Kuwait, hook a left, and then go into the refueling tracks. Once you're in refueling tracks, you get your fuel, and when your time when you're ready, it's your time to meet your time over target. And again, on time on target's the name of the podcast. So, to be on time on target, there's a whole slew of things you need to do and to get ready to go. So obviously I had the farthest to fly because my target was north of Baghdad, and we're down in southern Iraq at this point. So I was the first one to really leave the tanker track and stealth up and press northbound on my own. And I went around Baghdad to the east side, which is the side with Iran, and basically hugged the Iranian border. And as soon as you stealth up, until your antennas are in, you can hear everybody. And you hear the AWACS talking, you hear different controlling agencies talking. These are now combat controlling agencies, not ATC, because it's only military out there. But when you hear everybody talking, or other fighters checking in, it's not a lot of talking, but you do hear, okay, yep, everything sounds like it's going right. And everybody's using code words. So you had some key ones memorized, and you get ready for your mission. And so it's like, okay, pretty good. And then when you stealth up, you run through a little checklist, which you do it 3 or 4 times in your mind, and throw the switches in your stealth fighter, which basically tells you you're at maximum stealth. So you do that, but the weird part about that is when you do that, you can't hear anybody. So you're kind of out there alone and unafraid, and there were support assets in place in case stuff would happen, but I was the only fighter jet that was in that area as I pressed northbound. We were not concerned about the Iraqi Air Force, because they would largely not buried their Air Force in the sand yet, but they weren't going to take off to challenge us, even though we did have air superiority in place in case that happened. That was not a real threat. The real threat was getting shot from one of these, surface to air missiles or, anti-aircraft fire. So basically, if you can picture Baghdad and picture me on the east side of Baghdad along the Iranian border, I was next to Baghdad. So you think of a blacked out airplane, a blacked out cockpit. I don't have any lights on. I'm already stealth up, so I can't hear anybody. And I'm looking out at the city of Baghdad. And imagine when you're flying your commercial your commercial flights and you fly over a major city at night and there's all the lights on. You're like, oh, that's kind of pretty. Well, Baghdad, we had just done the decapitation strike, so there weren't as many lights on as I would say normal, but they weren't exactly blacked out either. There were plenty of lights on. I was kind of surprised about that. Like, didn't expect that. So, but I am actually being Baghdad when the clock ticked to 9 o'clock local Baghdad time, because I still had another, 10 minutes to fly northbound, then turn around back southbound. And then again, I was going to be over Baghdad 20 minutes later. But I'm watching a completely serene city. Nothing going on, no booms, nothing flying through the air. And then I'm looking at the clock in my airplane. There's a clock in the airplane. Some people still wear their watch because they like to look at the watch and trust that. But I was looking at the clock in the airplane saying, hey, this is about to happen in 5, 4, 3, 2. And about the time I got to 2 is when the boom starts. So missiles aren't quite as precise as airplanes when you drop laser guided bombs. But 400, I didn't count that obviously, but literally there were 400 explosions right around the Baghdad area. And I'm the only one that was really in position to see that. So that is pretty darn cool. And as I'm watching this, it's just like, holy crap. Okay. Yeah. Get some, right? This is happening. I'm all fired up and ready to go do my mission. And as I'm watching that, because you see really the missiles all impacted and they're done in about maybe 10 seconds. And then I start to see the return fire, which obviously they didn't know as missiles in that airplane. So they can think airplanes are 0 for 0, man. They're, surface to air missiles going up. So you're seeing, again, you don't often see the bullet or the missile, if you will, but you do see the burn trail and you see muzzle flashes and, you can see different things from the air and it's all these light sources on the ground, which is all return fire. And I just remember chuckling. And I was fully prepared to go do this mission. There was no doubt that I was going to be in some danger as I fly over Baghdad and drop bombs. They're going to shoot back, obviously. And my day could end very badly. I could be killed or I could be shot down and, land 100 feet from my airplane and try to say, that's not mine. All those things we've been trained for, everybody was ready for it. You become one with it that, yeah, I could die tonight, but I'm here to do my mission and I'm going to do it the best of my ability. But I do remember chuckling to myself, and for those that know me well, I have an interesting sense of humor. And I remember chuckling, like, I'm about to go fly through all that crap as I'm seeing it go through the air. So, and I knew we had spaced out enough to where the shooting should stop by the time I get back there. But, doesn't really seem like that when you're there yourself. So as I leave Baghdad in the rearview mirror, continuing northbound, I go up and I set up for my actual target. And the target, like I said, is a comm center, and I can tell you which one or, accurately describe it. But you can think conceptually of a 5-story comm center. And in an F-117, when you acquire your target or any bomber, if you're a bomb dropping mission, whether you're in a fighter or bomber or whatever, you line up on your target off of the GPS that kind of points you in the right direction. And then you start to look through. We had an infrared camera that basically I could zoom in and find the actual target, and I would confirm it about 7,000 times, right? Because you don't want to mess up. So you make sure it's in the right block. You make sure everything looks right, and I'm not cleared to release legally unless I have positively identified the target, and I can ensure that I'm going to drop my bomb exactly on that target. I can't account for malfunctions, but I certainly, up to the point of me pushing the button and it releasing from my jet, everything had better be perfect. Otherwise, I will be talking to some lawyers later on. And you train to that standard. So I'm not saying it from a big deal perspective, but yeah, you were very vested in making sure you had the right target, obviously. And like I said before, the boss and I were going to share this building, so I had my vent, if you will, to put my bomb through a couple thousand pounds of love into this building. And as I lined up, now I'm southbound, right? Because I'd gone north of Baghdad and I turned southbound and I'm pressing in. Everything looks right. There's a couple of clouds. I'm not all that concerned. I had gotten some air warnings off these new bombs. I told you that, you know, they just tested them, and we were the first ones to drop them in combat. And it was, you know, like, yeah, it should work. That's kind of the going out there. Yeah, it should work, and it should. Mine, I were getting some error messages, and I tried to troubleshoot them on the way up there, and basically I reverted them back to the same mode that they would have been in. They were laser guided bombs, and there were not any real clouds that I was concerned with. Oh, just a couple. But I do remember that as I'm flying in, it was smokier than I thought, and that's because you know, there had been some shooting going on, and now it was a little bit hazy, and I think there was still some burning of tires. You know, they used to talk about Saddam's ring of death, and I think that was largely Desert Storm. But you know, it seemed like there was some visibility issues at a distance, but those cleared up. I was able to see my target just fine, and then I went into release. So when you release a bomb in combat, I must first say that it was the first live bomb I had ever dropped. So you don't always get the privilege and training of doing the live mission before you actually do it for real. So this is the first live bomb I ever dropped, so that was kind of cool. I remember that when you drop the bomb, the doors open, and when the doors open, because they're internal bombs, the aircraft shakes, obviously, because now you've just put two things out in the wind stream. The bomb leaves, and then the doors close, which is very important as a stealth fighter that the doors close. We had this little light that would, as soon as the doors open, light comes on, and then when the doors close and everybody's happy, meaning all the systems talk to each other and everybody's a thumbs up that we're actually stealthy again, then the light would go out. So you can go drive right through the middle of Baghdad after just having bombed somebody, which will make them angry, and be fairly certain that they can't see you. Or if they can see you, they can't see you long enough to shoot at you. And if they can shoot at you, they can't see you long enough for the missile to track. And if the missile can track, then they can't see you. The missile can't track you long enough to impact you or to continue to track you. And then in game, if it can track you, it should miss when it gets to you. So based on a lot of technology and a lot of shoulds, you should be safe out there. So the bomb left the airplane, or I dropped the bomb. There's a countdown. You push a pickle button, so you can kind of imagine that. Heart's beating. I borrowed a phrase out of a movie, which is a story for another day, or that I'll tell you in person. But a movie that I love, and a particular phrase that I love that I'd obviously memorized, and I talked to that, and I had to pause for a second while I released the airplane, and I continued to recite that all the way to the impact. And at the impact point, exactly on time, all you can see is it's an infrared camera. So of course you see the IR bloom, which means all the heat coming from the explosion. Basically you go from seeing everything to seeing nothing. And then as the heat starts to fade, as you're now starting to go by the target, you can actually see the damage, some of the damage that you've done, but you really only get maybe a couple seconds and nothing you can really hang your hat on other than, yeah, did I hit it and hit it in the right place? So a lot of the footage from that night was put on TV. Mine was not, largely because I recited that particular phrase. So mine was not considered CNN worthy. But I thought it was epic, and received a few high fives from some folks when I got back to the back and they saw my tapes. And all these, of course, are taped when you're on a combat mission. So off target, off the first one, look up. Of course, at this point, I mentioned earlier that there were only actually two other F-117s out there. I assumed, because I don't know, because I've been stealthed up, there are actually 8 others. I would have no way of knowing that there was fallout. Went on into my second target. Now, the second target was kind of funny in the fact that, in picture as a combat pilot, Intel gives you a target pack. So in a target pack is this thing where you strap on your leg and you have pictures of your target from, and then I'm not going to go into where we get the pictures, but just imagine pictures of, target at range, and then what it looks like when it gets closer in, and what it looks like when you're really close in. And then on that close in shot, your closest in shot, there's a dot, and that's your DIMPI, which is the desired mean point of impact. And that's where you are to put your laser spot on the actual surface or building or whatever of where that dot is on your paper. So imagine my surprise when I got my second target. This was when we switched missions, we switched targets, and that was, I don't know, a day out. I can't remember exactly when we switched, but it's like, oh, my second target, and I gave it to me, and I just kind of laughed, and I'm like, is this for real? And you have weaponeering folks that they tell you where to put it. So they're a lot smarter than pilots. They're going to say, okay, if you hit it here, then here, all these things are going to happen. So they tell you where to hit the buildings. They tell you where to hit whatever it is. So I look at my second target, and it's a street intersection downtown Baghdad. So picture a downtown area, and there's red X's. So my first one was, again, a few miles north. So there was a city around it, but there weren't things that we made sure that we could not hit. So if you think of a target, a picture of a city block, there are red X's on several of the city blocks, meaning no matter what you do, don't hit those blocks. And we would line up in certain angles and directions to make sure that, okay, if my bomb went short or my bomb went long, those things happen. Generally, bombs aren't off left or right. So you think 612 airs, so you try to line up to where you would have the least damage if your bomb fails and lands either short or long. Well, my target was a street intersection, so I had to kind of laugh, and I'm like, who did this street piss off? But I kind of flipped through the target pack, and what it was is there was a command bunker, or so they thought, and there actually was, but the command bunker that was underneath that, and my bomb was going to hit the surface, and it was fused a little differently than the first one. In other words, fusing meaning of when it goes boom, if you will. It was going to delay and then go boom. So it wasn't going to hit the street. It was going to hit the street and maybe go under, go penetrate whatever's down there and then go boom. And that's how you weapon air stuff. In this case, it was a command bunker underneath, and obviously the command bunker has a bunch of tunnels that lead to it. So when you think of what actually does the destruction of a bomb, there is the actual, flash of the bomb when it goes off, and then there's also the overpressure, and that's what kills a lot more is the overpressure. So putting it into an underground system, rupturing this command center, whether anybody's entered or not, we didn't know, and then basically blowing the air blast through and rupturing the sewer, in that whole underground system, which would bleed over into the sewer and things. So a lot of damage right there, but really it was taking out that command bunker. So that was my target. I went in, and it was a lot. There was some smoke again, and I remember I get closer. It's like, okay, I can see clearly, and I'm a combat vet now, at least from a bomb dropper, because I dropped one a couple minutes ago, so I was no longer a rookie. And it's like, okay, there's my intersection. Confirmed it like 50 times because one of the corners of the buildings is, has the red X, and that's where reporters are. That's where if we have folks on the ground maybe scoring these bombs, that's where they would be. Like, don't hit that. So it's a go in, put the laser spot perfectly, and then when I drop the bomb, same thing. I didn't say anything this time. That was for the first time. Drop the bomb. It hits at the exact spot where the laser is, which is nice, and stuff's blowing up around me. Right when my bomb hit is when some other bombs went off, and they're all right within about a block of each other. And mine kind of did a little puff. It didn't have that big explosion like it had before. So as the doors are closed and I'm stealthed up, and now I'm dead over Baghdad, bombs are going off, lights, air starting to fill with some non-friendly stuff like missiles and aircraft fire. And as I look back up, I kind of had to ask myself, I didn't know if sometimes bombs will dud. So I safed up, and pressed out of Baghdad. And once I could get out of Baghdad, you have to give, and I did see some surface to air missiles from a combat perspective. For those that have been there, every time you see a launch, you pretty much assume that it's targeted directly on you until it proves that it's not. And again, that by if it just gets bigger in your canopy, the spot just gets bigger, that's bad. That means it's coming right at you and guiding on you. If you see any line of sight whatsoever, so we used to talk about if you're driving to an intersection from long range, if there's line of sight forward, that means that they're going to get there before you, line of sight aft. Anyway, hard to explain without using my hands like pilots do. But I saw 3. I remember in particular, I never really felt threatened that night, and was hauling butt out of town. And I was the first one out, right? Because I had to go straight south. So I had like the best exit. I just raged right north to south through Baghdad. Everybody else had this big east-west, get out of town, and then turn southbound and go home. So once you're off a combat mission as an airplane and you can talk to people, you de-stealth, so you do whatever it takes to do that, and you check in on the radio, you use your call sign again, Bimbo 42, and using code words, you'll say things like Rosetta, Braves, Hearts, and what does all that mean? Well, it's in code, so you don't get to know what it means. But what you're doing is reporting your targets. And I reported a successful strike on the first target because I was able to visually verify that, and I put an unknown status on the second one. So you could say, mission success, mission failure, or mission unknown, meaning you were not looking at it, or you just can't assess it from where you were. So that's what I did, and I called it an unknown, and then you got fuel again, and then you went home. So I won't necessarily go into any of the ride home, other than you feel pretty awesome when you go get to execute the mission that you've trained for so long. So, and successfully at that. So I was like, okay, even if it does, it's not my fault that it didn't go boom. So we get back, and when you get on the ground, this may surprise some of you. Actually, the first people you talk to are lawyers. So it's not necessarily the first people you talk to, but because you talk to the crew chief and you park the jet and they safe up, the airplane, and so you talk to maintenance first. But then once you're done maintenance, you grab your gear. Total mission was like 5-6 hours, so you've been up for a while. So you take care of some personal stuff, and then you basically take your tapes on into a secure area, and you hand your tapes over to Intel, and Intel plays them, and the lawyers look at them. And again, what they're looking for is to make sure you followed everything correctly, and if you didn't, or if there was a malfunction, whether it was your fault or not, the lawyers basically needed to be on top of any bombs we can't account for. Because if you picture a bomb leaving an airplane, if it throws a fin, meaning the fin fails, it could spiral and end up somewhere it shouldn't. And if it does that, then we need to put an effort toward finding where it hit the ground, and then, of course, trying to get in front of the narrative if it's bad news. So the media is also there because they're looking for the Intel folks have some technology where they can kind of strip out classified stuff, and they can get stuff uploaded, if you will, to CNN, Fox, whatever, to be able to highlight the missions, right? So I remember hearing, can't exactly use that based off of what I said there on my first bomb run-in. And then basically, as a pilot, you review the mission materials for the next day, and then you check in with everybody that's going to fly with you the next day, and then go from there. So remember, we launch at night, so this is now morning time, so you can go sleep all day and get up and do it again the next night. We did have a little makeshift officers club in Qatar there, where it's illegal to drink in the country outside of certain areas. The base had a special rule, so we could have, there was a 2-beer rule or 3-beer, I can't remember, it changed the next time I went. There were some cigars, so kind of a little bit of a feeling for combat. Those are the pictures that we all saw growing up from our parents in Vietnam, is with the cigars and things from back in the day, if you will. So got to do a little bit about that, but not much. And then we did have some sleep aids called no-go pills. You'd take a couple of those so you could actually get to sleep and then go back to your tent. So that was kind of post-mission, was pretty uneventful. And you would get back there and get ready to fly the next night. So I ended up flying the next 2 nights, and then off into the planning mission from that point on. So that's what I've got for the big story that I was going to tell you. Again, I wanted to tell you that story, because it gives you a little bit of a background of, throughout this podcast, I'm going to use flying analogies. I'm going to use military analogies. So kind of letting you know up front why I'm doing that. I have flown fighters in combat. I have put bombs on time, on target, to the split second. So when I've gone through all of the advanced military training that it takes to do stuff like that. So when I'm talking to you about what you need to do financially, what I'm doing is using those planning skills from the military on very complex missions to take your financial situation, which again, I don't know personally, but complex financial situations, break that down into simple steps that you can do on an everyday. So when you have a dream out there, you can basically turn it into smaller steps to make that dream into reality through execution. So that's what I've got for you today. Thanks for listening in. If you want more information, check out ototnow.com. I do have some private squadrons that you can join if you're interested. If you want to hear some different stories where I'm actually on live with folks. So with that, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for listening to episode 1, and look forward to you tuning back in later. Thank you. Bye.
That's our show for today. Check out OTOTnow.com for more information, including how you can join one of Steve's elite OTOT squadrons, as well as how you can book Steve to make your next event a huge success. Until next time, here's to tailwinds and clear skies for you to turn your dreams into reality.